Hello and welcome back to our second episode of the Hack Your Career live stream. I'm Keith Wilson. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Education for AttackIQ. And in this live stream, we expose you to stories about cybersecurity careers at all levels. We got a lot of great feedback from our last show with Bev, and I hope you all are just as excited as I am for today's guest. And today's guest is the Chief Content Officer for INE, but you may know him better from the Cyber and Security live stream. Please welcome Neal Bridges. Hey, Neal.
Hey, Keith. Thanks to you and the AttackIQ team for having me on.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, when we started this live stream, first got the idea for it, you were one of the first names that popped into our head. I mean, you're kind of doing the same thing with your cyber insecurity stream. Not exactly the same. You do a lot more training and a lot more technical things than we do on this stream. But you also have this goal of helping people get jobs in cybersecurity. Yeah. And we share that same goal, right? And that's why I think you're such a great guest for this show. So welcome to the Hack Your Career live stream.
Let's do it, man. Let's do it. I love it. And you couldn't be more right? I think I'm a huge fan. Like if you look at the tagline of the stream, right? The tagline of the stream is demystifying cybersecurity. And I think a year and a half ago when I started the stream up, that was the vision and the goal that we as the cyber and security team had is let's demystify technology. Let's demystify cybersecurity. Let's demystify the complexities, the lies, the gatekeeping, everything that goes involved into getting a job in cybersecurity. And I feel like we've been pretty successful at really breaking down the magic behind cybersecurity, and it's been a real joy.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the benefits of having a long cybersecurity career is you realize, like, you can look back at the beginning, right, and you can realize how disillusioned you were.
Oh yeah,
just like, I have no idea what I'm gonna do.
Yeah,
I don't know what's available. I don't know how to get there, and you just don't know anything. And you can look back and go, you know what? It's really not as complicated as I was making it.
Yeah.
So you've had a career that jumps across a lot of cybersecurity, but before all of that, you had your first cybersecurity job, right? And a lot of people, particularly people who've been in cybersecurity for, I'd say, over 10 years, maybe a little bit longer, didn't really have like their first 100% cybersecurity role because it didn't really exist. You didn't have cybersecurity analysts at most companies, maybe some of the larger ones or consulting firms and stuff like that. So I'd consider like one of my first jobs in IT, I still consider it as one of my first cybersecurity roles. It was home computer repair, right? Because I did a lot of malware removal and repair and remediation and stuff like that. So with that being said, what do you consider to be your first cybersecurity job, even if it wasn't something that was 100% cyber?
So I want to answer that in like two different ways, right? Because I think you're exactly right. If I were to go back through my career, I started like you in the IT space, and I was actually in the .com era in the 90s, in the early 2000s. I actually hit that first bubble in 2001 when that happened. And you're right, I was doing IT. I was doing domain controller setup. I was doing network administration. I was doing help desk for IT issues. I was doing routing and switching for the beginnings of the internet that we know now. And cybersecurity was baked into what we were doing in IT administration. And I don't mean like, oh, hey, go do that cybersecurity thing. It was like, as we were setting up domain controllers, we had to do group policies because we needed to better administer computers. We needed to set up strong passwords because we had people trying to hack into, our routers that were directly connected to the internet. We had systems that were directly connected to the internet. And so those were cybersecurity roles that we had that I didn't know was a career. It wasn't a career at the time. And so definitely, like, when you think about, you can look back on your past and say, holy cow, I was doing cybersecurity then and I had no clue what it was I was doing. If I were to think about today's modern taxonomy of cybersecurity, and you were to ask me what my first modern day taxonomy of cybersecurity was, it wouldn't be until 2013 when I got out of the Air Force, where I got my first job running a pen testing team and being a pen tester for a Fortune 100 company. Because even when I was in the Air Force for 10 years and I was doing offensive cyber for 10 years at the Air Force, I didn't have the wherewithal to understand that there was an entire cybersecurity world from 2003 to 2013 that was happening in corporate America, in the Fortune, in the Fortune 5,000 space or whatever you want to call it. And so I didn't really realize that I was having a cybersecurity career for 10 years in the Air Force until I crossed and got out and said, aha, I'm actually now in a career of cybersecurity. And so two different worlds there where, you start out in IT doing the work, but not knowing what it was. You go inside of a bubble where the world is transforming around you. And then you come out and you go, holy cow, this cybersecurity thing just got so much bigger than I ever could have imagined.
Yeah. So it's funny because I mentioned this on the first live stream. One of the reasons that I started this show was I see, and you probably see it a lot on LinkedIn too, and even some of the people that watch your stream that you teach is a lot of people entering cybersecurity, their first career goal is to become a penetration tester, which is near impossible. Yeah. Like that takes a lot of experience. However, in your case, your first full cybersecurity role was a pen tester. But what I think people are ignoring is all of the other stuff you had to learn to get there that was part of IT and security. And I think people kind of are ignoring that fact of now that cybersecurity and IT have kind of split divisions. They still work together and there's still a little bit of overlap, but in a lot of companies, they're almost two separate departments, right? They work together, but they're two separate teams. So people have that in their mind of, okay, well, I can be a penetration tester because that's a security job and that's the only one that I know. What they don't realize is that a lot of the guys that are doing that were doing IT roles and no routing, switching, OSI model, all those basic things you need to know to be a pen tester. They've been doing that for 10 years before they landed that pen tester role.
I think that's fair. But I want to add a twist to that because I think the world has shifted just a little bit, and this is where I love this back and forth conversation, right? Because when I got out, it was really easy. I've been through 2 different CCNA classes. I went through 3 different Microsoft certifications. I went through multiple Linux, LPIC certifications, A+, Sec+, 5 different SANS certs, right? We pioneered bringing SANS into the Air Force when we built the first functional training unit, for offensive cyber in the Air Force. And so, I did have a lot of training, and I make no qualms that I was incredibly grateful for that. But that was the world then, when it didn't exist as mainstream as it does today. And in the last 7 to 8 years that we've seen the world transform, I don't think, and this is where I challenge the status quo of the industry, I don't think it's unrealistic for a new learner to get training today and get their entry-level job as a penetration tester. I don't think that penetration testing is an intermediate or an advanced job skill that people can get. And here's why I say that is because I've done that. I've trained folks, brought them in from college, and within 18 months of having them, this was in 2013, so this was right on the cusp of that, brought them straight from college, and within 18 months, had them on hacking networks within 18 months. And they had information assurance degrees. Okay. And so I think as we see the industry grow and I see the industry evolve, and this is where I get really, really visceral, because I think that this is the try harder mentality that is out there that is creating a lot of toxicity in our cybersecurity industry, whereby you've got a lot of folks who have that mentality, who have been in it for 10 or 15 years, who say, well, I put in 10 or 15 years. I got all this CCNA. I got all this Microsoft. I got all this learning. I know all this stuff. You can't be here unless you're this high to ride this ride. And they've created toxic gatekeeping in our industry. And I think that that's the problem that we have, that you absolutely can realistically be a junior penetration tester in this world. Now, I will flip the coin on you. One last thing before I get off this high horse. We have a supply and demand issue. Everybody wants to be a pen tester.
Yes.
And there just aren't that many jobs for junior pen testers out there. So we have more supply of junior pen testers than we have demand of junior pen testers. And that's the problem that I see in the industry.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that puts it all together much better than the way I stated it. Yeah, I think the 10 to 15 year thing is just that's kind of that. You're right. That is kind of an old school mentality, because the training that's available now has closed that gap. I mean, absolutely. I was one of the first people that got like a actual degree in cybersecurity. Like that was something that was just emerging as I was going through school back in 2000. I think I graduated. I got my associates in 2006. So that was still kind of this new thing that was blooming. and training has obviously come a long way. You and I both provide training, so we've seen what it's done. So yeah, I can see where training has definitely closed that skills gap. But like you said, that it's the supply and demand issue, right? And on top of that too, companies recognize that hiring a junior penetration tester is still going to require more training.
Yeah. On top of that, I also think that we this is going to sound terrible, and I know it's going to sound terrible, right? I say this because I intentionally try to sound terrible when I say things, right? But most companies actually still to this day don't have internal penetration testing teams. If you look at the Fortune 100 stack, probably still less than 50% of them, I would even argue to say less than 33% of them actually have internal penetration testing teams. And so when you really think about that, that really puts into perspective that supply and demand issue. It's not like you're going to go be a junior penetration tester and then go apply to your mom and pop, or go apply to a small MSSP, or go apply to even a Fortune 1000 or a Fortune 5000 company and expect them to have their own internal penetration testing team. And I think that then that gets back to that demystifying cyber, is that most organizations still don't know how to implement good pen testing strategies in their cyber defense strategy. And so as a result, the jobs just don't exist in the same supply that most people think that they do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think we could do a whole other show on this topic, right? Like,
as you can tell, I'm incredibly passionate about this one.
yeah, and I mean, it's a big issue. Like I said, it's one of the reasons that I started this show, is I saw a lot of people setting themselves up for disappointment.
Yeah.
Right. And I wanted to expose people to all these different things that they could do. So your first cybersecurity role was actually doing, like, full on cybersecurity role was doing pen testing.
Yeah.
And then here, I've got your LinkedIn pulled up here just so I can make sure I'm going in order here. So, I mean, you've had you've jumped through education as well, right? Like, you've also taught education. You were a SANS instructor.
Yeah.
Before that, though, you had more cyber roles, right? Before you went on to SANS. So let's talk about your second cyber role. What you did after the pen test gig. What was that?
Well, so before I do that, I want to kind of talk about the role that education has played in my career, because I think that that's important for people to know, right? Because I think there's a misconception out there. Those that can't do teach, right? I think is the old adage that gets said in there, and I think that's not really a very fair statement. In the Air Force, I was really actually a huge fan of the model that we had in the Air Force, which was you typically are operational for 2 to 3 years, and then you're forced at that 2 to 3 year mark to kind of go back through the pipeline as an instructor, because you just came from the field. And so therefore you are the best person to come back to the schoolhouse and teach what it was that you just learned in the field, to make sure the folks who are coming through the schoolhouse. And if you look at modern day education systems like the university system, not to bash on universities, but you've got tenured instructors who have spent 20 or 30 years there, who are incredibly out of touch with what's happening in the real world. And so I very much got used to the Air Force model, which was, you go and you come back through and you teach. That way, when you go back out in the field, you're smarter, because you get smarter by teaching the content.
Absolutely.
You're surrounded by people who know what it is that you know and are pushing you to drive you to do more and to do better. And you're giving back to the workforce that's coming in. And so when you look, that's how my Air Force career was. And so I did cyber in the Air Force. I then spent a year and a half in the schoolhouse, building the first functional training unit for cybersecurity in the Air Force. I built what was known as undergraduate network warfare training and intermediate network warfare training. I also built the initial skills qualification for the offensive cyber, capabilities that the NSA has. I built the threat hunting capabilities that other organizations inside the Air Force has, as well as the incident response capabilities. And then I would have gone back out had I not chosen to leave the Air Force. And so then I got my job at one of the Fortune 100 companies doing pen testing. And at the same time that I was doing that, that's when I was a SANS instructor. So I actually got the benefit of being able to work in the job. And that's actually the SANS really wants you from a culture perspective to be doing the job that you're teaching. And I really appreciated that at the time as being a SANS instructor, is that I didn't want to make the decision about whether I was technical and hands-on or whether I was an instructor. I enjoyed the fact that I could do both at the same time. And that carried with me for a while. I went from there. I went to kind of my first big program build out. I went to an MSP out of Michigan where they had asked me to build a pen testing and a threat hunting program from scratch, and I built a 5 million ARR annual recurring revenue business for an MSP out of Michigan in a 12-month time period. I went to go do another build out with PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I built the Midwest incident and threat management as well as pen testing practice with PwC.
Let's pause there for a minute,
Yeah, go for
because I think when you're building something, that's one of the best opportunities you have to learn. Because
that's right.
That I know I've learned more in these last almost 2 years of building AttackIQ Academy than I have in probably the last 5 years of my career.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of those teachings come from failures or mistakes that you made, because there's a lot of opportunity to make mistakes when you know what you're doing, but you don't know completely what you're doing, right?
100%.
Because you're building this thing that nobody else has done. So it's brand new to that organization or the world or whatever. What lessons did you learn between establishing the pen testing program for the Fortune 100 company to doing it for a consultant for PwC?
My ambitions were different in the sense that I wanted to. I built something small in a Fortune 100 company. But I'd come on not in charge of a program. And so I was kind of there as a leader, team leader perspective. And so I was in charge of 15 web app pen testers and 5 network pen testers, including myself doing the pen testing work. And this gets back to the maturity in the industry. I think we were talking about this, kind of, or you mentioned this at the beginning, right? Where like when you first start in the industry, your eyes are big and you're like, you've got one perspective on the industry, and that perspective changes as you mature through. Mm-hmm. When I was leading a team and I was at the behest of a director who was setting my direction, and I was behest of a CISO who was setting my, the overall cybersecurity strategy. And I was like, this is dumb. This is lame. I can do this so much better if I had the reins to do this on my own. And so I sought those opportunities to say, I'm going to put my fingerprint on starting a program from scratch. And that was my driver to seek that opportunity. And then I failed, in terms of like my perception of what I thought was the right way to do that. And, mm-hmm. And so between the Fortune 100 company and the PwC, the consulting business, I worked for that MSP. I was successful at conducting the pen test, and I was successful at helping the organization generate money. But I quickly found that my conversation as a sales engineer, my conversation with the sales team, my conversation with the CISO as I was trying to sell pen testing services, as I was trying to sell threat hunting services in that small consulting environment, I found out that my perspective as an individual contributor and at the tactical level was vastly different than when I had to put that business hat on and I had to talk to the CISO. And I think that was my first aha moment where I realized there was such a disconnect between, oh my God, why aren't you patching this Windows XP machine, to holy cow, now I understand why you're not patching this Windows XP machine. And so like, I think everybody goes through that realization where they think I can do it better if you just get out of my way and let me do it myself. Mm-hmm. And I lived through that and I realized that is so not reality.
Right. I mean, truthfully, yeah, maybe you could do it better, but yeah, like you said, there's a million things you aren't aware of until you start like speaking to other business units and you're like, oh, okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense and completely undoes everything that I thought was normal.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And so when I finally figured that out at the MSP in Michigan, and I started to get into traction, I started to make my pen test more valuable to the customers. I started to make the product that I was producing more valuable. That was when I made the decision that I wanted the next challenge. And so I wanted to go to a bigger consulting firm. I wanted to go to a Big Four. I'd never been to a Big Four. I never knew anything about a Big Four whatsoever. But I'd always heard that they were fun and challenging. I'd also heard a ton of nightmares from people who'd been in Big Fours. But I was like, okay, now that I've figured it out in this small MSP, I want to repeat it at a bigger consulting company. And so that was my mentality as I walked into a consulting. I wanted to scale it. And I figured out this is why it's hard to scale when you start to apply it at a bigger company. And so like I sought out opportunities to build to take the visions that I had for pen testing, and then that ended up translating into threat hunting, into threat intelligence, into incident response, into security operations teams, and ultimately into security organizations as a whole. I wanted to challenge my norms and my understandings of what it took to implement good security in an organization. And I actively sought out opportunities to put me into challenging spots to build programs, I guess you could say, where I intentionally sought to fail in those, and I did. I failed. It was definitely some learning experiences along the way.
Yeah, I mean, and failure sucks, and I think learning to deal with failure in itself is a whole thing that comes
Yeah,
along with your career too,
yeah,
right? It comes along with maturity, but also like with your career. The only way you get used to failure is by doing it,
yeah.
by experiencing it and learning from it. And I think that's the important part. You know, any situation I've been in where the outcome wasn't exactly what I was hoping for, I always tell myself, well, at least it was an educational experience.
It's amazing. This conversation of failure seems to be a theme for the last 30 days, but it seems it's come up in my streams, it's come up in chat, it's come up in one-on-ones that I've had with mentees, over the last 30 days. And I've come to a renewed sense of realization that people are afraid of the concept of failure. And I think the message that I would send people to take away from this concept of failure is that it's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with failure, right? There's nothing
Right.
wrong with admitting failure. You want to fail. You want to fail to be to be better than what you are, but you want to fail fast, right? There's this concept of,
And you want to know why you failed.
absolutely, absolutely, and you need to have that skin that says, this didn't work exactly the way that I intended it to. I want to do better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's an okay message to package with failure, because I failed, and I'll be the first one on stream. I've got failure for days that I'll talk about on stream.
Me too.
and because I want people to understand that it's okay. We normalize that failure because I learned so much from that failure.
Yeah, I mean, I've got an 11-year-old son, and one of the things I always tell him is, I go, buddy, I don't care if you make a mistake. It's what you do after the mistake that I care about.
Yeah.
Like, what do you learn from that? What do you do to try and fix it? And I think that's the important thing that people need to get past is, failure doesn't mean it's the end. It means it's really the beginning of you figuring out what to do next. Because I can tell you, from every failure I've experienced, fixing it, something awesome has come out of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, we hit on the SAN stuff and how education's played a bit of a part in your career, right? And I like that idea of, go out and do, and then come back and teach. It's a good cycle, right? And it's a good way to put a capstone on all those things that you just went out and learned so you could do them, and coming back and solidifying that, going, well, I can teach that to somebody else.
Yeah.
I really like that. I think I'm gonna start using that more. Obviously, like I'm in a teaching cycle right now, right?
That's the journey I'm on. Like I spent the last 6 years building security teams for Fortune 100 companies. I'm in my teaching cycle. I want to give back to the community. I want to be like, I just spent five years building Fortune 100 security teams, threat hunting teams, pen testing teams, incident response teams, GRC teams. Like, let me tell you all the things that I saw out in the real world. I'm in that cycle right now, and I'm damn happy to be in that cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do want to ask you some questions around that. Before I do that, though, I just noticed a question from the chat that I want to ask, and it hops back to the early conversation we were having. And it's, what are areas where supply is lacking comparing to demand as far as jobs go in cyber?
My statement has always been that I think that there's a 10-to-1 ratio of demand in blue team jobs versus red team jobs. Even if we focus it just on red team and blue team, for those technical folks who are listening, if you're looking for a place where there's a ton of demand, it's on blue team, hands down. And I equate this, and this is how I say this, right? When you go into an organization, any organization, they have an IT team. That's almost an invariable given. They have somebody doing security to a certain extent. That somebody doing security, if you were to look at their roles, it is defending an organization. Now, what that defense looks like obviously varies with companies and budgets and things like that. But the defenders are the front lines in every organization. And whether you're a security analyst, whether you're a SOC analyst, whether you're an incident responder, whether you're, whatever that front line is, you are the frontline infantry soldier fighting the bad guy every day. You're responding to every BEC, you're responding to every ransomware, you're responding to every terrible phishing email, right? You're responding to, password resets, password spray attacks, everything else. You are the frontline defenders. And so where there is a ton of demand on the blue team side, right? If you're looking for those technical roles, we've talked about another piece of demand. And this is something, again, when we talk about straight talk, real talk with people, is this, and I'll give credit where credit is due. Joel Fulton, who's the CEO of Lucidum, we've had him on the stream several times. He's a regular. He's a good friend of mine. He's a former CISO of Splunk. He talked about this concept of garbage jobs, right? And I'm not here to say that GRC is a garbage job, but if your audience is anything like my audience, it's predominantly technical folks, and they're like, ooh, GRC, who wants to do that? Or ooh, IT audit, who wants to do that, right? But you have to realize that there's a demand there, and sometimes it's easier to go into those types of roles. Like I would almost say that IT audit, risk analyst, SOC analyst, incident responder level 1, those are the help desk versions in cybersecurity that get your foot in the door, maybe into pen testing, maybe into threat hunting, who knows, moving forward. But I would look at either GRC type roles, audit type roles, or blue team SOC analyst IR roles.
Yeah. I mean, before I was doing educational stuff for AttackIQ, I was a sales engineer for AttackIQ. And whenever we'd go to meet with companies, and I mean, I've been a sales engineer for about the last 7 years or so. And I'm talking not just AttackIQ, but all the companies I've worked for, I think I've met with maybe 3 red teams the entire time. It's always blue teams, and it's not because the red teams aren't interested. It's because they're not there. Mm-hmm. They don't have them. They only have the blue teams. Yeah. So I want to remind everybody that we are answering questions from chat. So if you do have questions for myself or Neal, please put them in chat, and Alexis and Haley will grab them and share them with us. Sorry, I didn't mention that up front, guys. But yeah, if you do have questions, please go ahead.
And I love to answer questions. I will sit here all day and answer questions. Well, at least to my next meeting, but I'll sit here and answer questions.
We'll sit here and answer questions for at least the next 15 minutes. Okay, so circling back to the educational thing, and this is kind of a selfish question for me. So, and we talked about how you have kind of established this pattern in your career of doing and then educating. Mm-hmm. What lessons did you learn about teaching others about cybersecurity during your time as a practitioner?
I think for those who aren't familiar with teaching, who have never been a teacher, and when I say being a teacher, I don't mean like, hey, can you show me how to use Nmap type of teacher, right? Maybe I guess it depends, right? But I think you test pretty significantly your ability to actually do whatever it is you're being asked to teach by being an educator, right? If you're asked to teach purple teaming, you're like, yeah, I know what purple teaming is. It's like the joining of blue teams or red teams. Okay, cool. Can you sit down and teach for 8 hours a day for 1 week straight, 40 hours solid of purple teaming content? And then you just kind of go, whoa, how do I take somebody from knowing nothing, barely knowing what an IP address is, for 40 hours straight to the end, so that when they get to the end of that conversation, they're like, I can sit down and I can explain to somebody else what purple teaming is. Right. And I think that's the misconception that comes when people think about what it takes to be an educator in any space. It doesn't matter whether it's cyber or IT or, how to bake a cookie, right? I think that's what I think people fail to understand. And so I think the biggest thing that you learn as an educator versus what you learn as a practitioner is that you don't know nearly as much as you think you do. Right?
That is so true.
When you start teaching, you have those moments where you're like, why do I use this switch? Which command do I actually use for this? Oh, actually, what is the process that I do to go from here to here to here? Hold on, I got to research this. And I actually got to put my mental capacity to work to not only conceptualize what it's like to teach a concept, but then to stand in front of students, either virtually like we're doing now, or in front of a classroom like when I was teaching for SANS, and be able to convey that. And then if you look at like some of the classes that I would teach, whether it was in the Air Force or whether it was SANS, we would teach classrooms with 60 people in them where you've got everything from a network admin to a network administrator to a pen tester or a red team or all the way up to a CISO in the same class together. And you've got to try to teach DDoS attacks, or you got to try to teach Wi-Fi hacking, or you got to try to teach how to run an exploit to that gamut of skill set in the same amount of time. Like you can't just be up there like, I'm going to teach you group how to use Nmap in the most experienced way possible, and then I'm going to teach you over here how to use Nmap in the most basic way possible. You've got to do the whole group, and you've got to bring these different layers of people up to the same layer of knowledge before they move on to the next topic.
And you can't lose the more experienced group by trying to teach down to the less experienced group, which adds a whole nother challenge.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. And so I think I've always said that, if you think you're smart, technically, go teach. You will find out how dumb you are. And I say that as somebody who has stood in front of several classes, hundreds, thousands of hours of classes, and gone, oh my God, maybe I don't know this nearly as well as I thought I did.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've had crisis of conscience before where I'm like, maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I am because I have no idea what this means. I thought I thought I knew MITRE ATT&CK really well, and apparently I was wrong.
This is why one of my common messaging to new folks now on the stream, right, when they talk about what my recommendations for them to do is to produce content, right? Because I think in this day and age where it's so easy to produce content, I think if you were, and you see this with a lot of folks in our community, right, where they go to a Try Hack Me room and then they put up a walkthrough, or they put up a YouTube video, or they do something like that. And they've come back and they've said, now I see what you're talking about, Neal. I understand how real it is to try to convey a concept across and get that video out. And so one of my biggest advice to new people, even, mature people in this industry, challenge yourself, produce content, write an article, make a YouTube video, something.
I want to add on to that because it's something I actually did for an interview a couple of years back. And it was, I'm thinking now, this is probably 6-7 years back. So, I mean, there was social media, things like that, but it wasn't as easy to create content. So the the job I was applying for was, I was slightly underqualified. Well, I wasn't underqualified, but other candidates were more qualified than I was. So I ended up writing a white paper on what it was the company did and brought that with me, printed out, laminated, bound, and gave a copy to every interviewer. That was my first experience in going, oh, well, content production helps. Now, the rest of that story is I didn't get that job. But 2 months later, they called me back because one of the hiring managers had that white paper sitting on his desk since I interviewed and looked over at it. And they offered me another role there that had opened up. Same role, just in a different location.
And I think the message you're trying to convey here, which I would wholeheartedly agree with, is content production is the next level of resumes.
Yep.
Right. Yep. You've got, everybody talks about HR being the gatekeeper. And I think that that's fair. I don't mean to discount the role that HR plays in gatekeeping, getting you to the hiring manager. But, we talk about hacking, right? And one of the things I think people get confused about is like, you can hack computers, you can hack systems, you can hack people. Hiring is a system. Now it's a system that's hundreds of years old, and there's a very antiquated way to do it, whether it's cyber or IT or, the bake shop down the road. There is a system to hiring. Content production is a fantastic exploit to use in hacking the system of getting your job.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it makes you stand out above everybody else. And whether or not you are, it certainly helps add authority and expertise to what you're saying.
Yeah.
As we've seen, misinformation's been a big thing online, right? But that just speaks to the power of influence that the web has over people, right? It doesn't necessarily matter what you put out there. People are still going to assign it some authority.
Yep.
So building your own content really builds up your name. What we're essentially talking about is personal branding.
Yep.
And I mean, that wasn't a thing when you and I initially started our career.
That's right.
So if you could go back, if you could go back to yourself from 20 years ago when you were first starting your career and give him some advice, Neal from 20 years ago, what would you tell him?
I'd tell him not to give up on the diet or the workout routine. But then after that, I'd really love to be able to show him this short that I put up on YouTube where it says you do not have to be a basement dwelling orc to be in cybersecurity, because I very much I started out. We just had Thanksgiving this last week, and my dad passed a couple years ago. My dad was my inspiration for getting into cybersecurity way back in the 90s. And my mom and I were reminiscing about some of the things that I did when I was a kid. And of course, Neal getting into hacking comes up at the Thanksgiving table, right? And my mom starts talking about that that time that my dad found out that I was actually hacking other universities back in the late 90s. And there was a lot of stigma around it then, right? That, it was crime and it was, you were going to go to jail. My dad was like, not only did my dad punish me for hacking into another university, but he was like, you are going to go to jail. You're going to rot in jail for the rest of your life. It is a horrible thing that you're doing. And he really chastised me for it. And so that instilled this concept in me that I needed to be a basement dwelling orc if I wanted to quote unquote hack. And even through the Air Force, you're sitting in, sensitive compartmental information buildings with no windows, and, you're not allowed to talk to anybody about what it is that you're doing. And I let the Air Force really brainwash me that I couldn't really talk about what it was that I was doing. I wish that I had taken more seriously my personal brand throughout my entire career, because I didn't start taking my brand serious, honestly, until I became a SANS instructor. And even then I didn't really put a whole lot of emphasis on it, because I was like, man, this is crazy. Like, this is putting a big target on my back. This is, I'm gonna, attract so much attention. The Air Force is going to kick me out. I'm going to lose my security clearance. And I can't emphasize enough that I don't know what my career would have been like if I'd taken my personal brand seriously back then. But I can tell you that today, in this day and age, with the way digital information is, with the advent of Web 3.0, and I talk about this as well. Like, if you can bat your eyes and you can scoff all you want about Web 3.0, same people did it when Web 2.0 happened. The same people did it when the first web pages were being coming out. And you can laugh all you want, but that stuff is around the corner. And so the longer you fight because you let everybody else determine what is or is not acceptable, the longer you fight against these systems instead of figuring out how to make these systems work for you, you're going to be better off once you figure that out. And that's what I would go back and tell myself, is figure out how to make those systems work for you instead of fighting against them, because you can't defeat those systems.
Yeah. So, and it's still, it's funny too that, the advice even 20 years ago, before those systems exist, is personal brand, because that you can still build a personal brand without social media. Mm-hmm. Social media just helps amplify that to the world.
Yep.
Right. So we're coming up near the end now, and Neal, you've been great. Is there anything else that you think that our listeners should hear?
I think my biggest things that I always tell people, right, regardless of where you're at in this industry, right, whether you're new or whether you're experienced, imposter syndrome is real, right? And you heard both Keith and I talk about this, right, in terms of how it's impacted our careers. You have it now. You've probably had it at some point in time during your journey, whether you're new or whether you're experienced. Don't let the opinions of others in this industry transform into what ends up happening action-wise, as you go out and you try to make your way into this industry. This industry is so immature. This industry is so immature that nobody can define whether you should have this degree or this cert, or you should follow this path, or this is the only way in cybersecurity, or if you've got this, then you can't be that, or if you don't do this, if you don't have this many CVEs. This industry is so immature for that. Mm-hmm. Don't let the industry decide your path in cybersecurity. There's literally 1,000,001 different ways to be successful in this industry. My biggest thing that I always tell people is keep learning. It doesn't matter what side you're on, right? Red team, blue team, GRC, risk and governance, IT audit, IT in general, like whatever the case is, keep learning. Like, to this day, I continue to learn. I continue to challenge myself, but do it in a healthy way. Physical and mental health in this industry will chew you up and spit you out. I say that very distinctively, right? This industry will chew you up and spit you out if you let it. And so you have to own your physical and mental health if you're going to continue to be successful. And so out of everything else that I tell people, those are kind of the three things that I try to get everybody to focus in on.
Well, that's a great answer, Neal, and thank you so much for your time today and being on the stream. I hope everybody that's watched this has learned a lot. Check out Neal on the Cyber Insecurity podcast or I&E Training. He runs their program for Security Cloud and a handful of other things, right?
Yeah, so I own all the content for all the cybersecurity content. I own all the networking content. We've got some. I don't want to do a selfless plug for I&E, without your permission. But
Yeah, go ahead.
No, so we're on the cusp of releasing some very market, first cloud training. We just acquired, for folks who have been around the cybersecurity industry for a while, we just acquired Pentester Academy, which is really going to revolutionize our entire lab platform across cybersecurity, cloud, networking. Secret here for the AttackIQ audience who chose to tune in today. We just demoed some of the first ever networking labs that are on the new platform. We're on the cusp of releasing some cloud first labs that I think are going to be really transformative, even compared to some of the competitors that are out there. We're branching out into data science development, and really trying to be that, that career focused mindset when it comes to training.
Right. A holistic sort of technology training.
Yeah, it's we want to pick the things that matter in IT and be really focused in on those without the broad sweeping approach and being like an inch deep.
Awesome. And if you're looking for training on threat-informed defense, you can always visit AttackIQ Academy.
I want to give a plug for that, right? Because I will say this, ever since we've shown our community on cybersecurity, the AttackIQ platform, the amount of people from our community that have gone, taken your training, raved about it, and gotten actionable information from your training has been fantastic. And so Keith, you've done an amazing job with the team that you've got over there and putting that content out there. And so absolutely, from all the training that I've seen, you guys have got fantastic training. So keep up the good work over there.
Well, I appreciate that. And Neal, I'm sure you and I will have plenty of conversations as we're kind of peers in the industry and we're kind of doing the same thing. I think you have a lot to teach me. So thanks for being on the show today. And Alexis, take us out.